If you raise the cost of something, you decrease its prevalence. I kind of think that it's also a reflection of the same thing that Bloomberg reported on just a few days ago. They said that across businesses, men are thinking, I'm not spending any time with a single woman that isn't associated with me in some formal manner, like my wife. I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to mentor young women. I don't know the literature on the decline in sexual activity well enough to know if it's valid or reliable. One of the other things that you want to think about with regards to sex, and I think this is probably particularly true for women, is that to what degree is it in women's interests to allow the cost of sex to fall to zero? Because with pornography certainly does that. And it just seems to me that that's not a very good long-term strategy for relationships between men and women, because whatever sex is worth, the cost of zero is the wrong price. I've heard from a number of women read blog reports on their frustration with their attempts to be relatively sexually selective. Like, let's say they decide that they're not going to sleep with their new partner on the first date. They're frustrated by the fact that to the degree that they're being cautious in their sexual behavior, which I think is actually an admirable idea, that they're instantly outcompeted, especially if their partners are somewhat impulsive, by women who will say yes at the drop of a hat. It depends on what the goal is. That's the thing, is that there's short-term sexual gratification, but the literature indicates that married couples, for example, or couples in a permanent long-term monogamous relationship are more sexually satisfied than single people. And maybe the single people have to be parsed out into those who are sexually successful and those who aren't. But I suspect that wouldn't make that much difference, but whatever. There's the utility of relatively immediate sexual gratification, for whatever that's worth, and the adventurousness that goes along with that, let's say. The hunt and the excitement of having a new partner and all of that. And maybe even the danger that's associated with that, because people like to have a little bit of danger in their life. But what's the goal? What do people want? The question is, what's the end game? And this is what people have to ask themselves. Is like, one of the corollaries to the female pornographic romance is actually the establishment of a long-term relationship. It's so funny because I got pilloried in the New York Times for talking about enforced monogamy. It was an anthropological term, and all it means is that there's a pronounced proclivity in human societies around the world to enforce monogamous relationships at multiple levels of the sociological hierarchy. When enforced monogamy, so my son was just married, and if he came to me next year and he said, hey Dad, guess what? I've managed to have 4 affairs in the last year with hot women and my wife hasn't found out about any of them. I'm going to say, what the hell's up with you? You violated the vow that you took. You're putting your whole future at risk. You're betraying yourself and your wife. And well, that's enforced monogamy. You know, the idea is that the social norm is the establishment of a long-term monogamous relationship, and that there are strictures put in place to support that, but also to punish deviation from it. You say maybe not so much on the punishment end, but it depends. What do you want? What is it that you want? You want a long-term stable relationship or not? And if that's the goal, then your behavior should be devoted to whatever it is that facilitates that goal. And I certainly don't see that casual and impulsive sex fits that bill, not in the least. And all of the evidence with regards to living together shows that that's actually detrimental to the establishment of a long-term relationship. So, first of all, common law marriage, people who are in a common law marriage are much more likely to be divorced. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, people who live together before they get married are much more likely to be divorced after they get married. So the idea that you can try someone on for size and see how it works, and then you're going to see if you're compatible, it's like, that's one story. Another story is, how about you and I live together for a little while, and if you're not so bad, but I can find someone better, and if I do in the next year and a half or so, because we're not hooked together in any formal way, I can just trade you in. It's okay, you can do the same to me. But I don't really see that as the sort of complementary mutual interaction that leads to the formulation of long-term trust. And I think it's a better story for interpreting what constitutes living together than we're going to try each other out, because that's what mature people would do. But most importantly, the data indicate that it doesn't work. Is that you're more likely to get divorced, not less likely. Because maybe the right attitude is, you're probably about as flawed as me, and we're lucky that we found each other, and so let's see if we can make a commitment, because we're engaging in something that's very risky, an intimate relationship, and we're going to commit to each other and see if we can build something of value across time. And there's a definite risk in that, but there's a compliment to your partner. It's like, I think you're worth making a sacrifice for. And what's the sacrifice? Well, it's everyone else. It's a big sacrifice. And if you don't see that as a compliment, then I don't think you're thinking, because not only is it a compliment, it's sort of like the ultimate compliment. And maybe you don't get to have a marriage that works without that compliment. Maybe it's so difficult to establish a long-term relationship that's functional that you have to make a walloping sacrifice very early on in the relationship in order for that to even be a possibility. And maybe not, because what the hell do we know about what binds people together? It's not that easy to stay with someone for a long period of time. It's a real commitment. It takes a tremendous amount of effort.